Well, good afternoon, everyone. Still, uh, I'm still letting people into the Zoom. I'm going to be muting all of you as you come in. Please don't unmute yourself until we get to the question and answer period. I'm really appreciative of the great interest that we've had. This is the second panel for us using the Zoom platform. Last time we had 86 people on at the peak, at our peak, and we had a similar number of folks sign up for the Zoom today. Hopefully we will have a similar proportion of folks turning out. I do know that it's field season. I'm hoping that for most across the country, I'm hoping that if you are able to get out and work, that you're staying safe and staying well. I want to wait just another couple of seconds to admit everybody that's still joining. But once again, thank you for everyone that's joined the Zoom today. The topic of our landowner panel today is voluntary conservation partnerships around sensitive species, a landowner's perspective. We've got 5 landowners joining us today from some very different parts of the country. To the things they have in common are many. One of the things that they have in common is that they have all worked on partnerships with diverse partners around species that have a regulatory context, either pending or current or anticipated. So it'll be interesting to hear from them all. Each one of them is going to talk a little bit about their story and what they felt like was important about those partnerships and those decisions to partner. If you have questions, let's hold them till the end. We should have a good half hour for questions. But if you think of a question as we go, you can go ahead and type it into chat. Once we get through with the panel, I will read those questions off for as many as we have time for. If you have somebody that you want to direct that question to, please indicate that. If not, if it's just for the panel, indicate that as well, and we'll let the panel decide who's best situated to answer the question. So without any further stalling on my part, I'm going to introduce you to Jim Stone. He's the chair of Partners for Conservation, a landowner in Western Montana. A number of folks on the phone know Jim, but he's going to share part of his story that you may not have heard in the past. So Jim, take it away.
Oh, great. Steve, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, or I guess it's mostly afternoon for all you folks, and good to see some smiling Zoomer faces out there. And as ranchers, we're finally getting into the Zoom thing, so you may not be able to get rid of us at all. So, but again, thanks for the opportunity today. And as Steve mentioned, we ranch in Western Montana, and I think most of you probably heard of the infamous Blackfoot River. And so my story today is a little bit about an endangered fish called the bull trout, but sort of backing up, I was a pretty lucky young man that a lot of the conservation that happened in the Blackfoot Valley happened when I was a really young man. So I always say sort of before conservation was sexy, these folks in the 70s decided that it was really important to sort of take our future into our own hands. And there were all kinds of examples of people trying to use this valley for not only hunting, recreation, but sort of for their own uses. And that didn't always sit well with gates or fences, that there were a lot of those things that were being rudely interrupted, if you will, and didn't go well with cows. So it was really the folks in the valley from, we talk a lot about, sort of the ground up conservation, and these folks really talked about that. And as we always say, as ranchers, we don't always talk well or communicate well with ourselves, but we sure didn't communicate well with a lot of our partners. And it really took Montana Fish, Wildlife Parks and BLM and a number of landowners across the valley sat at the table and decided that there was a better way to do conservation. And that really was about building that trust and credibility, and really inviting everybody to the table. I remember my father always had a lot of advice for his young son that didn't listen so well. But that first bit of advice that I use even today is that you really need to invite everyone to the table. And that sure doesn't mean that they will come, but you want to be sure that you have that. So if you come up with endangered species issues like we're talking about today, that gives you a lot of credibility that those folks are there, they're in the discussion, they're in the planning, and they're in helping you make really sort of durable solutions. So my story sort of goes, as I was slowly growing up, 1989, American Rivers listed the Blackfoot as one of the 10 most endangered rivers in America. And I think, again, still in college, or I guess just out of college, but it reverberated through this valley about what that might mean. And what that really came from was American Rivers was from Portland, Oregon. And people really didn't think about that this really valuable asset, the Blackfoot River, runs right through 132 miles through the Blackfoot, and is oftentimes referred to as sort of the barometer of how we're doing work here. And so a lot of this group that had started back in the 70s said, man, do we want to try to solve these issues internally or externally? And there was a lot of push from American Rivers to sort of put up sideboards and go, we're going to deal with the river, but you guys outside, you can go do whatever you want. And again, it was the real collaboration of the folks at the table, but landowners, there was really no data on the Blackfoot. And so there's questions whether or not there was really anything wrong with the Blackfoot, or was it other places? And so it was landowners that raised about $36,000 to hire a biologist from Montana Fish, Wildlife Parks to come start doing some data collection in the Blackfoot. And long story short, they found out, there was definitely some issues with the Blackfoot, but guess what? A lot of the issues happened on our ranch and 209 other tributaries that fall into the Blackfoot in this valley. And so it created an idea that we should have our own Trout Unlimited group. So there's a group called Blackfoot Chapter of Trout Unlimited that started in 1989. And to date, they've spent a little over $20 million working on those 209 tributaries. And I can tell you that there is no way in heck we would have done all that without a collaboration of a lot of partners getting that work done. 1991, I imagine most of you have seen The River Runs Through It. And my funny story to that is there's always a sequel to a really good movie, right? I guess I'll question whether that's a really good movie, but even so, our sequel to that movie was The Realtor Runs Through It. So you can have lots of notoriety from back to American Rivers to Robert Redford. And what that brought was a lot of people and a lot of scrutiny. And so as we're coming along, we're doing a lot of work in this river. And in the meantime, all that comes along is here's this fish called a bull trout that none of us really paid a lot of attention to. And it was sanctioned for listing. And in the Clinton administration, the Secretary of Interior was Bruce Babbitt. And at some point in time, they decided that Mr. Babbitt would come to the Blackfoot to do the listing of the bull trout. And I can remember my father not happy about that at all, mainly because everybody liked to run under the radar a little bit with this whole conservation piece to the Blackfoot. But we did invite him to the Blackfoot, not that we had a lot of choice probably, but what we could control was the messaging. And I think so often, if you've all had interactions with secretaries, usually they come with a whole list of people and a whole list of this is what we're going to do and this is the timing and all of that. And this group, the ground up conservation, said, you know, we're going to invite Mr. Babbitt, but you've sort of got to play by our rules. And my folks were involved in the guest ranch. And what's the easiest way to get people sort of engaged is to invite them for a meal or a cup of coffee, right, around that table. And so we invited the secretary to breakfast at this guest ranch. And our point to doing that was not only probably to take some of the nervousness out of all of us, but was to start that communication and start the story. So he really understood what he was going to do that day. He knew it from his perspective, obviously, about a listing, but we really wanted him to understand how important and the history and the legacy of what people had done in the Blackfoot to get that recovery started here. And in the end, it was all the pomp and circumstance you can imagine, TV cameras, and he stood right at the confluence of the Blackfoot, which is kind of this big rock pillar that's it's kind of our signature, but the Clearwater River runs into the Blackfoot there. And we had a outfitter helping him fish, and he stumbled once and he was wearing hip waders and he about went under. We almost drowned the secretary, but we were able to pull him out in safety. But the messaging, again, not to be funny, is what the end run for him was. And we were all scared about that we thought, boy, you know, you're trying to say there's 20 plus years of conservation here, and yet we really weren't successful, that we're in the end, all this stuff that we did together, we're still listing a species. And his message to America was, you know, we're here in the Blackfoot listing the bull trout, and we all wish we weren't doing that, but the reason we're here is because of the success of what's happened, and we wouldn't be listing other species if we were doing work collectively like this. And so it was a win-win for both, I think, the administration and Secretary Babbitt, and it was sure, I think, successful for landowners here, that it brought, I guess a lot of people think maybe listing is a bad thing. And I think as ranchers, we just assume we get ahead of that and we don't list. Definitely is a benefit. But also listing the bull trout brought us lots of dollars, and it brought us lots of expertise to help us continue solving. So it sort of led us not only from the fish, but to the grizzly bears, to the wolves, to other species we have here in the valley, that we're much more sensitive to how we deal with those critters day to day. And so I think it's, for my story, it's just, again, you have to come from within. That had to be solved. Every issue we talk about in this valley really has to come from here. And yes, we need all of you that are on this Zoom call today for your expertise, all the things you can support us, but you need that sort of homegrown, neighbor up story. So that's kind of the end for me, Steve, and we can sure answer questions, but it's a scary thought to have an endangered species related to agriculture, but I think here we're pretty excited that they're just part of our culture, sort of part of our DNA, if you will. So thank you all very much for taking a little bit of time.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it. We'll, if you've got a question for Jim, you can type it in the chat now or later. But next up, I'd like to introduce Russell Davis from Southeastern Colorado on the plains of Eastern Colorado. And he's going to share a little bit of his story around his experience partnering with sensitive species. So Russell, I'm unmuting you, and you should be good to go momentarily. Russell, see if you can unmute yourself.
All right.
Get you. There you go.
All right. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Steve, I got about 2 minutes into this and my screen went black. So we'll carry on. We're back on live, but trust that we get through this afternoon. Hello, everyone. Russell Davis here, East Central Colorado. We're glad that you are online with us. This virtual thing is quite a process. I'll never forget the first conference call I was on in dealing with Fish and Wildlife Service Region 6, and that was in 2008, 2009 with Heather Johnson and Jim Stone and a bunch of folks. And I'd never been on a conference call. We'd been on a party line here at the ranch for a number of years. And now all of a sudden in 2020, I am on Zoom. So we have come a long ways, folks. I want to talk a little bit about partnering with the mountain plover here at the ranch. We are a cow-calf operation in shortgrass prairie. And my life changed in 2001. I discovered that I had mountain plovers on the ranch, had no idea what the bird was. It even had the wrong name as far as I was concerned. We were 80 miles from the Rocky Mountains. And to have something called the mountain plover here was really strange to me, and I have lived here all my life. But I found a little biologist out in the pasture one day in the middle of prairie dog habitat, and she'd been there the day before. I could see from a distance, it's about 4 miles from the house, and I thought it was somebody hunting over there, which is pretty normal for my country when you're in prairie dog town. Next morning, this same vehicle and young lady was over there, so I thought I'd better go over and check, see what was going on. And as I came in, I noticed a pickup that you don't normally see in this part of the country. And it started like with TOY on the back of the tailgate. And I thought, what in the world is this? Usually it's Fords and Chevys and Dodges, but a little Toyota pickup parked in the middle of prairie dog habitat. I had no idea what was going on, and this little gal walked over toward me with a pair of binoculars around her neck and just a smile on her face. And I introduced myself and I said, "What are you doing here?" And she goes, "Mr. Davis, they're everywhere." Well, you need to understand that we were standing in prairie dog habitat, so you would expect to see prairie dogs everywhere. And I said, "What do you mean they're everywhere?" And she says, "Well, the mountain plovers are everywhere." I had no idea at all what she was talking about. I'd lived here all my life. I thought maybe she'd been drinking or, I had no idea what this was about. And I said, "Well, what is the significance of that?" And she said, the next statement that she made just changed my life. That moment, she said, "Well, Fish and Wildlife Service is getting ready to petition to have listed the mountain plover." And a number of things went through my mind, all of which was that I just asked this young lady to leave. I had, first of all, whatever this mountain thing was, it had to be a mistake. We're shortgrass prairie. There are no mountains in my country, so a bird that was called a mountain plover was lost. She was lost. And so I kindly asked her, well, I wasn't very kind, quite honestly, to leave. I said, "I did not give you permission to be here." And she kind of stammered and stuttered, and she said, "Well, Mr. Davis, they're everywhere." And I said, "Young lady, you need to go." And she says, "Well, can I at least tell you what we're doing?" And so she took the next couple of minutes to explain to me again that this bird, there was a concern about it. They'd been in the area for about a month looking for it. They knew it was in eastern Colorado, and they found him, and it was on my ranch in this prairie dog habitat. She'd been looking at them actually from the neighbor's fence line. Well, as the conversation went on, I was not happy, and so I asked her to leave. Well, you can imagine what the next couple of weeks was like for me as I tried to sort through what this was all about. What did it mean for the ranch? If there was a bird actually on the ranch, how did it get here? Who brought it here? There's not a sign as you drive down Highway 71 in eastern Colorado that says mountain plovers welcome here. And what this was all about. Well, a number of things begin to happen. Obviously, I made several telephone calls to try to figure out um, to get some information on the mountain plover. And you know, actually, for this young lady, they'd been here for about 30 days on a couple other ranches and had not found the birds. And this was probably the most exciting day in her life. And boy, did I pour cold water on it. And so they began to work on their end. They actually had a researcher in the area and begin to figure out how they could have a conversation with Russell Davis and try to get back on the ranch. About 2 weeks later, I got a telephone call that invited me to a mountain plover workshop, except that was not how it was framed. It was actually an RMBO workshop. And I got a call from a neighbor, Carl Stocksell, and he said, Russell, we want you to come over to a workshop. He says the RMBO is hosting it. Well, that sounded pretty interesting to me because I thought RMBO, that had to be some sort of gun club or rifle club or something. And so as the conversation went on, he says, no, it's Rocky Mountain Bird Observatory, which is now a Bird Conservancy of the West. Tammy Vercottern is leading the group now. And I said, Carl, I'm not interested. And he said, Russell, we need you to come. We have the mountain plovers. We know they're here. Not sure why it's here, but we need to allow the research and figure this thing. And I said, Carl, I am really not interested about this at all. And he says, well, they're serving lunch. Well, that caused me to pause for a moment, folks. Lunch is a good thing, but I still wasn't interested. I said, just let me think about this. And my son was in the background and heard the conversation, and I hung up on Carl. And Kyle was like, Dad, they're serving lunch. We really need to go. And so much contemplation, we ended up over at the meeting. I stepped out of the pickup, didn't know who was going to be there, didn't know what this was going to be about. It's going to be about a silly bird. I had a little gal, pretty similar to the one that I met on the ranch. Tammy Vercottern met me as I got out of the pickup. And she took my hand, shook my hand, and said, Mr. Davis, we're glad you're here. I hadn't even introduced myself. And that day was, I was mad that I was there. I was upset. I had fence to fix, cattle to check. I didn't want to be here, didn't want to listen to this. There were two other men that was there, Ken Morgan with Colorado Division of Wildlife and Bill Noonan with the Partners Program. And both of these men spoke. And the conversation went very well. I mean, a lot of things that Ken said I could relate to, understand. Begin to understand why the plover was here, why it was here in our landscape. And a number of doors began to open. And folks, this is about partnering. And the only partnering I had done on the ranch was with my dad. And he would call in the morning and say, Russell, this is what you're going to do. And I would say, yes, sir. And Ken came to me. We at the end of the day and said, Russell, I'd like to come out and spend the day with you. And I was really reluctant in doing that, bringing somebody from state Division of Wildlife to come out and spend the day. And I said, well, for what purpose? And he said, well, there's a reason the birds are here. And we need to figure out what that is all about. So a number of things happened over the next couple of months. And as you think about partnerships, you know, it's a collaborative process that involves people working together. And that was something very new for me. I can talk to you about cattle 24 hours a day and explain to you what's going on here at the ranch. But little did I know what was going on with the wildlife and with the mountain plover. And Ken opened that door for me. He says, we need to do a couple things. He says, I'd like to put 2 biologists on the ground. And one will look at the broader perspective of what the ranch is all about. And then the diversity of the wildlife species here. And then the other one, Dr. Dreitz, will bring her specifically in to study the plover. And so we started that in 2001. Well, as I began to build these relationships with these folks, you need to understand that my community was over in the corner watching what was happening here at Weininger Davis Ranch. And over the next year, my conversations with my neighbors became very quiet. In fact, the only conversations I was having was mostly with the wildlife people and folks coming on the ranch. And even with my family, I found that my conversations were changing. And what was happening was, as I was building relationships, building partnerships with Fish and Wildlife, Division of Wildlife, I was losing relationships with my neighbors, my family. And that continued for a couple of years. And I think the biggest reason as I look back on those years was that, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty, just as with COVID and this virus thing going on right now. There was a lot of uncertainty in those early years as to whether this bird was going to be listed or not. And there was just a real fear of unknown. So how do we deal with that, folks? How do we deal with it as landowners to protect our landscape, to protect generations of what families have built and put together? One of the things that Dad has taught us, and I am one of 4 boys in our family, and he says we need to embrace our challenges and move forward. And not hide our head in the sand.
Is it easier for me to dump this into your other cup?
And so that's what we did. We moved forward. We embraced it and tried to figure out what was going on here at the ranch. And a number of neat things happened. But it took about 3 or 4 years, and my community became really very quiet about what we were doing here. They quit calling me to come and help to work on weekends and doing different things. And it wasn't until 2005 that we formed the Carville Community Alliance. And my neighbor had asked me to join the alliance, and we were really struggling in our small community to keep our young people here. And he says, we need to figure out a way to bring folks back into our community. Well, of course, at that time, we were doing quite a little bit with plover. Ken had taken me out on the road to talk to congressional folks and to landowners about the importance of landowners being engaged. And a lot of good things came from that. But one of the things that I began to realize is that birders were some interesting people, and they like to be on the land looking at birds. And as we began to think about how we could bring dollars into our community, one night we were sitting at the Alliance meeting and been struggling with this for about a year. And somebody said, well, folks, are there any ideas about how we can bring folks here? And I said, yes, sir. I said, I believe I have one. And I said, maybe we can think about having a birding weekend and invite folks to come in and take tours, look at the mountain plovers, our lifestyle. And you could hear a pin drop that night, folks, at that meeting. And I thought, boy, this maybe should have been a time that I kept my mouth shut. And Carl broke the ice, and he said, well, Russell, that's not a bad idea. Does anybody have a better idea? And all of a sudden, one of the ladies in the group said, you know what, we could keep these folks in our homes. Another lady said, yes, we could provide meals for them. And the next 20 minutes, this jabber that just went on within the community center about how we could make a birding weekend happen. And I was just amazed. I had no idea that folks were interested in what I was doing. And then the school became interested. We started a raw program through the through the FFA program and the science class at the high school. And the research took off with Dr. Dreitz. We had 10 years of research here on the ranch, and some phenomenal things came from that, which was quite an education. Then we began to build relationships within Fish and Wildlife Service and a partners service and ecological services. I mean, the partnerships, you know, they were widely varied. The interests were very different, but we began to share knowledge and ideas, resources, funding sources, and the goal was clearly defined, was to keep the mountain plover off the endangered species list. And it was just amazing the number of partnerships that developed from this for the Carville community. And it did not come easy. I think at times that the most important thing for us to do is to strip away our biases and our hidden agendas, be open and trusting, transparent about how we move forward in a collaborative process. And I just saw some pretty exciting things happen here, not only at Weininger Davis Ranch, but the Carville community. And I think what's happened is it's created a process that will last for generations. And it's changed me as a person, as a man of the land. And at the end of the day, I'm so thankful that we took the opportunity and the chance to go down this road and develop those partnerships with a lot of you folks. And in May 11th, 2011, a good friend, Steve Girton, called me on the phone and he said, "Russell, I have some news for you." And Steve had been down to the ranch twice, and he was back in Washington, D.C. at this time. And he said that we've made a decision that the mountain plover does not need to be listed under the Warrant Protection under the Endangered Species Act. And that was a phenomenal day, folks. 10 years of working through this to have this come about. And that's what a collaborative process is all about. It's working together and doing something for a species, having this common goal. And isn't that what we want at the end of the day? So thank you for bearing with me, letting me tell this just disjointed story. There's a lot more to it, a lot of the things that happened. But, Steve, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Russell. Great job. And if you've got questions for Russell, if you're thinking about them now, type them in. I think all our panelists are going to be able to stick around until we get through to answer some questions. But we're going to stay in the West just a little bit longer and go over to Jay Tanner to talk about partnerships and relationships in his northwest corner of Utah, the Grouse Creek community. Jay, I think you should be unmuted any moment now.
I think I'm there, Steve.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you. I see several names and pictures of folks that I recognize. Hi, everyone. Steve mentioned I ranch in northwestern Utah and northeastern Nevada. My ranch is a public lands ranch. I have a mixture of private lands, private leased lands, state school trust lands, BLM permits, and I have purchased grazing easements on about 55 sections of other grazing land. And they've asked me to speak a little bit about sage grouse. Utah is a small player in the sage grouse habitat community. We have about 8 to 10% of the sage grouse area and habitat. But in Utah, my ranch in this area is one of the prime sage grouse habitats in the state. So the area is important for sage grouse in Utah. And our area also is important for some migration of birds of sage grouse in Nevada and Idaho as well. We're finding that some of them from the other two states are wintering here in our area. To give you an idea, we are in most of the ranches in the Great Basin, but we also include part of the Columbia River drainage as well in our ranch. The ranch elevation is from about 4,200 feet to nearly 11,000 feet. Most of our cattle winter at the lower elevations, and then we summer most of the cattle at elevations from 6,500 to 9,500 feet. As a public lands ranch, we have a long history of working with public land administrators and others. That's not always been a happy occasion for both sides, I'm sure. But it's important for us to know that we have to work together, and we have to find a way that we can resolve conflicts and issues that may come up. When folks settled here in the area, most of the time they came and settled the water, the more highly productive land, but they thought that they could control the range if they had the water, and they probably could. But as it turns out, that means that the privately held pieces of property are very productive wildlife areas. They're really important for wildlife species like sage grouse. But also the adjoining public land that maybe doesn't have any water is important for the ranch, because that's where the cattle need to graze as well. And so I was asked to speak about greater sage grouse. In the late 1990s, the Utah Division of Wildlife and Resources and Utah State University biologists came and met with some of the folks here in our community and asked that they wanted to talk to us about sage grouse. And we're concerned about declining sage grouse populations across the West. Now, we still had and have now still a good population of sage grouse. As we discussed issues, we don't have much development here, no energy development. Some of the real big issues for sage grouse across the West, we didn't have, but we identified some things that were potential problems. Some were invasive species like junipers and cheatgrass. We talked about grazing management, those types of things. As landowners, we told them that we felt like they had a problem with predation. And they kind of said, no, we really don't think that's the case. And so as we discussed back and forth over a period of time, we decided that we would try to do some work on some of our private range lands here in the area. And we agreed to work with the university, with Utah State, to do some studies on how we can work on rangelands to improve sage grouse habitat. Part of the process that we agreed to was that we would have a working group, a sage grouse working group here in the area, and that we would have PhD graduate students that they could have access to our ranch to look at the range improvement projects, to catch and radio collar grouse and follow them through their life cycle as much as they could. And so that really started in our area the process of working together for a species. Previous to that time, we'd fought a lot about different species, like introducing elk back into the area and those kinds of things, but we've never really worked together. But as we began to explore the things that we could do, we hired some work on doing habitat work in the area, and we hired a firm to look at what we thought that our community ought to look like, what the area ought to look like, what it would be without invading junipers and those types of things. And so we had science to back up some of the work that we were doing. And about that time, the NRCS Sage-Grouse Initiative got going in 2010. And so that provided a bunch of money that previously was not available for range work and those kind of things. And it was prioritized for the type of work that we were going to do. And also about that time, I was at a meeting, and I don't even remember the meeting, and I don't remember what happened, but I was probably sitting at a table with someone I knew complaining about various things that was going on in the area, and that we were not getting any help with water projects and those kind of things. And a short period of time after that, I received a call, and it was a lady named Sylvia Gillen, and she said, "I'm the state NRCS conservationist." And I was sitting at this meeting with you, and you were discussing these things, and she said, that resonated with me. And so I have talked with Senator Bob Bennett, and he has agreed to earmark $200,000 to help establish a CRMP in your area, if you're willing to help establish the CRMP. Well, I don't know about you folks, but it's not very often that somebody calls me and says, I've got $200,000 that I'd like to share with you to get going. And so it kind of put me in an awkward position. I either had to stop complaining about everything that was going on or start doing something. And so through a process of work, we've established a CRMP in our area that we folded the sage-grouse working group into the CRMP, and we actually included a little more of the county than what originally was designed to do, but it worked well for us to do that. And we invited and included everyone who was interested in being involved and seeing how our community could work together and how we can agree on how we can manage the lands in our area. And so we invited the Forest Service, the BLM, our state water agencies, wildlife agencies. We invited the environmental groups and the sportsmen's groups. And of course, we encouraged the landowners to participate. And fortunately, I don't have a lot of time, so I'll just say that that group has functioned very well together. It has provided a great resource for us to get a lot done. And we have done a significant amount of work in this area for sage-grouse habitat. In many ways, we've led the nation in juniper work and those types of things. And it has changed the face of our valleys and will help the species that are here, not only sage-grouse, but all the other sage-grouse obligate species as well. My buzzer's buzzing, tells me my time is up. I'll just close by saying thank you for listening. I'm grateful for those of you who I've worked with in the past, and the conservation community I'm finding is smaller, so I expect that I'll be working with some of the rest of you that I don't know as well in the future. And I'm grateful for folks like you who are willing to work with people like me. If you'll notice the picture behind me, you'll see that folks have lived on this area that I know of for the last at least 6,000 years. And I hope that in the next 6,000 years that some of the things that I'm doing on my ranch and in the neighboring areas will benefit, so that the land and the species who are here today will still be functioning properly, and those species will be thriving and doing well as well. And I'll try not to leave anything on the land like that, but I hope that it'll still be functioning from there. And if we work together, it will be. And I thank you for your time.
Thanks, Jay. Great job. And I would have let you go on if you would have knocked that timer in the head a little bit. That was great work. But if you've got a question for Jay towards the end, we will have some time. But we're gonna go all the way across the country towards the east in another direction, and hear from landowner Tom McAvoy, who's coming with us from the recently impacted hurricane landing zone of Connecticut. Usually I'm in Texas. Usually I get to say that, but Tom is the one has been without power the last several days. Got power back over the weekend, and really thank Tom for making the time to visit with us with everything else he's got going on. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Steve, and thanks for the opportunity to share a little bit about the experience I've had working with the New England Cottontail Habitat Improvement Program. I used to say that it was an accident that I got involved, but now I consider it really to be more of a good fortune to have been involved with this program. My experience started, oh goodness, about 10 years ago. I acquired a parcel of land that was an old dairy farm and hadn't been farmed since the 60s. And obviously the pastures had overgrown and the forest really is reforested, which in some respects created some problems for the New England Cottontail. For those of you that are wondering, yes, the Massachusetts author Thornton Burgess did name Peter Cottontail after the New England Cottontail species. It is my understanding, the only natural rabbit species to the 6-state area. So my understanding also is that the University of New Hampshire conducted a study trying to determine the distribution of rabbits. And there was a point about 10 years ago, they were considering placing them on the endangered species list, which I had no idea what that meant. And I didn't even know about the New England Cottontail until one day a gentleman by the name of Travis Goody came to my property. He was working with the Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection, and he asked if he could conduct a study to monitor and identify the New England Cottontail, which I found kind of odd, but said sure. And I was actually in the process of bulldozing all the pastures open and clearing some woodlands, and fortunately I stopped. He took close to a year to conduct his study, and he came back and he indicated that there was a significant population of the New England Cottontail. And he asked if he could bring a few people down to talk to me about some programs that were important in the process of restoring some habitat and the New England Cottontail. And I certainly said yes. A couple of weeks later, I had about a dozen, I would say dozen cars, all with federal and state license plates pulling into my yard. It was a bit daunting, nerve-wracking, and they all came. They were very excited. They walked around the property, and they began to discuss the concept of putting together a habitat improvement program as part of this New England area to restore the New England Cottontail. And, you know, I just jumped in and said, sure. It was a bit daunting. They used a lot of big words that I didn't understand, invasive species and these words for plants and shrubs that I never even heard of. And then they talked about some contracts and government agency lingo and acronyms, and it was a bit daunting. And as I've shared in the past, they said, but there are grants that we can use to help this program. And then someone said, but they're taxable. That did not sit well with me. However, there was a gentleman from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and I named these individuals specifically because they are committed individuals working for these agencies, and they're the boots on the ground that really make this happen. And so a gentleman by the name of Ted Kenziora, he was out of New Hampshire with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. He stayed on after everyone left, and he said, would you allow me the opportunity to sit down, kind of hold your hand, walk you through the project, help you understand what it's all about, so that we truly can be productive and partner with you as a private landowner to accomplish what needs to be accomplished. And I'm so thankful that he did, because it was overwhelming. I had worked with programs, WHIP program and EQUIP program and a couple of others. There were 16 different contracts over 5 years, and there were very specific details of what needed to be accomplished. And my background is working for a financial institution in banking, not farming, and not agricultural development or wildlife. In fact, the closest I came to being a conservationist was volunteering with Trout Unlimited over the years with my 3 sons. So the project went very well. It was almost experimental because they developed a number of unique ways of removing invasive species, replacing them with groupings of shrubs and fencing, and doing it incrementally throughout various areas on the property so as not to affect the existing New England cottontail that we hear on the property. And I actually decided to do it myself together with my sons and some other friends. It was a daunting project. I was able to buy some equipment to be able to do the project. Its success was because of the real hands-on people that came from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and then the NRCS with Bill Purcell. They taught me a lot, not only about the project and how to manage the resources that are here. They were very hands-on, they were flexible, and it enabled me not only to do the project cost effectively within the guidelines that were provided, but more importantly, to be able to continue it. And as I was hands-on doing the project myself and with friends and family, I gained an appreciation for what really needs to be done and what needs to be done long-term to preserve the property. So my experiences with them through this time was very helpful, educational, and it's because of those people and those agencies and their commitment that helped me to truly understand the importance of not only the New England cottontail species of rabbits, but other species on this property that benefited from the habitat improvement. Not only did I gain a better understanding and appreciation, but I think that my family did as well. And some of the things that I found that were important for the success is, you know, the communication between the agencies and the nonprofit organizations that I've come to work with and know, and to get that information out to our neighbors. Some of the speakers today spoke about their ranches and farms. New England is a very small area. My farm is very small. It's about 115 acres. But the landowners around me who got on board and around New England that saw successes and became engaged because of the importance and the communication that took place enabled the program to be successful, not only here in Connecticut, and I'm south of Massachusetts border and east of the Rhode Island border, but throughout New England, where a tremendous amount of efforts took place with these agencies, with other private landowners and organizations. And so for me, it was a tremendous experience working with these organizations and partnering. And I think for me, I kind of jumped in feet first. I tend to do that with things, but it can be daunting and it can be something overwhelming. And I would encourage those landowners that may not have had experiences yet that are considering, know that these organizations are really there and motivated to do the right thing. I would say that Ted Kenziora was, more importantly for me, an advocate for me as a landowner. As we were engaged in these various contract negotiations, there were some over the past 5 years where there was some discrepancy between what the NRCS felt was the beneficial way or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Ted served as an advocate for me, making sure that my interests in the land and its use, but yet the modifications that needed to take place for a successful habitat program, we were able to balance my concerns and needs together with the importance of the program in order to be successful. And I think that was probably my best experience in working with the agencies, is knowing that each and every one of the people that I worked with truly had a compassion for what they were doing. It wasn't just a job for them. I learned that they're compassionate about it, and I've developed some excellent relationships. And from that time, after about a 5-year program, it was determined successful. It was an awesome experience to go up to New Hampshire when Secretary Jewell announced, after releasing some rabbits in a program up in New Hampshire, and announced that the species would not be listed. It took me 5 years to understand the importance and realize that I was a small part of a very successful program. And following that, it was kind of interesting that rabbits were taken from my property and brought to the Roger Williams Zoo, and it was a successful breeding program. And 4 years later, those rabbits that were released were great-grandchildren of the rabbits that came from my property. So it was a special experience, and my experience moving forward and working with other organizations and Partners for Conservation, it culminated into a life-changing experience for me, and seeing the benefits as well as what I see, and many of you have already mentioned, it's a legacy program for this property to be preserved, for my children and grandchildren to understand the importance of it and to be part of that. So excellent experience for me, and I would encourage those that are considering, learn more, be involved. It's life-changing and truly beneficial. So thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Great story from a great part of the country, and so glad that you guys have your power back on and that you were able to spend some time with us today. We're gonna go over, stay on the eastern side of the country, but head south just a little bit and hear from Reese Thompson in South Georgia, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the partnerships he's developed, and he's going to do that with his good friend Burner Bob looking over his shoulder. So I know he's going to do a good job. Reese, take it away.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Reese Thompson. Before I begin, I'd like to say a special hello to a lot of friends that I've missed seeing. So stay healthy. I'm a 66-year-old longleaf tree farmer in Georgia, located 3 hours south of Atlanta. My family was in the turpentine business for 4 generations. And turpentining is when you peel off a streak of bark from a pine tree to bleed it to get the sap. And then the sap is used to make a variety of products, everything from paints to medicine. But turpentining is a thing of the past. It's been replaced by a chemical process that the pulp mills use now when they're making paper. So we're tree farmers. We're planting and growing longleaf pine trees for 3 markets. The small trees are used for pulpwood that are processed into paper and tissues. The larger trees are cut into dimensional lumber, and our premium market is utility poles. It takes 40 years to grow a pole, and only the straightest trees qualify. Just a brief introduction to the longleaf ecosystem. Originally, it was some 92 million acres stretching from Virginia to Florida to Texas. And by the year 2000, it had been reduced by some 97%, making it one of the most imperiled ecosystems in the country. It's home to a lot of sensitive species. So there was a wake-up call, and a lot of public and private partners came together to create America's Longleaf Restoration Initiative. Their objective is to increase the acreage from a low of 3 million to about 8 million by the year 2025. We're about halfway there. Tree farming is my profession, my passion, my hobby, and my mistress. It's as close as I'll get to immortality because the trees I'm planting will outgrow me. We enjoy having visitors to come to see the management we're doing on the land. And I often ask them, what does it take to grow a 100-year-old tree? And after some quick math, somebody will usually say 100 years. Every now and then somebody will say 98. But I tell them, I said, that's how long it takes to grow a 100-year-old tree, but that's not what it takes. You have to have 3 and maybe 4 generations singing off the same page to grow a 100-year-old tree. When I turned 50, I did a lot of soul searching, wondering what my purpose in life was, other than being a link in a chain from past to future. I didn't have any obvious talents. One day, a wildlife biologist friend was visiting, and I showed her a tract of 100-year-old trees with undisturbed, intact ground cover. She recognized the significance of it, and she randomly laid a yard square frame on the ground and began to identify 29 different species of plants in that 1 yard square. It was a real wake-up call. It was a life-changing experience to me. It dawned on me that I had spent 50 years walking around not recognizing the unique treasure underneath my feet. Every month of the year, there are small pollinators blooming. It's been said that an intact longleaf ecosystem rivals a tropical rainforest in biodiversity on the ground. It's home to some 900 different species of plants. I decided that my mission in life was to protect, enhance, and restore the longleaf that I had been entrusted, and to set a good example for the next generation. Because we're good stewards of the land, we're blessed with many sensitive species, one of which is the eastern indigo snake, which is federally listed. It can attain a length of 9 feet. He is immune to the venom of the eastern diamondback rattlesnake, which we're also blessed with. We have fox squirrels, spotted turtles, and Bachman sparrows. But one of my favorite animals is the gopher tortoise. He is a candidate for federal listing. He's known as a keystone species because the burrow he digs his home is used by some 300 other animal species. One of my favorite sayings is, if you see a turtle sitting on a fence post, he didn't get there by himself. Hope everybody can see that. That's 2 gophers sitting on my shoulders, and they didn't get there by themselves. And likewise, I can't be the good steward of the land that I strive to be without the help and the financial assistance of many federal and state agencies and conservation organizations. I'm a hands-on tree farmer. I've been riding a tree planter for 48 years. I actively participate in several NRCS programs. I can't say thank you enough. I couldn't do what I do without you. Also, we participate with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners Program. And I want to say a big thank you to Matt Filsinger for his leadership. They're helping us restore some native wiregrass ground cover, and we're doing some herbicide work. And until 6 years ago, I had never met anybody from the Fish and Wildlife Service. I thought they were probably first cousins to IRS agents and bearers of bad news, but I'm proud to say that some of my closest friends are Fish and Wildlife personnel. Now, the longleaf ecosystem is fire dependent. It's evolved over millions of years, being burned on average every 2 to 3 years due to lightning strikes. Prescribed fire is our primary management tool. Someone once said, I'm an artist, I create landscapes with fire. Now think for a moment, I'm burning trees that I've planted, and I hope to harvest sometime in the future to pay my bills. But think about it. Imagine a rancher setting a fire to his pasture with it full of cows. Obviously, we have to be very careful not to do more harm than good. It's impossible for me to safely burn by myself, so I rely on the assistance of many partners, and we're extremely fortunate that certified burn teams from the Oregon Society, Georgia DNR, Georgia Forestry Commission, the Longleaf Alliance, the Nature Conservancy, and many others help us burn. It's a dirty, hot, dangerous job, but it reaps tremendous rewards in creating good habitat for sensitive species and building lifelong friendships. We entrust our safety and our well-being in the decisions of other burners. It creates a strong bond. Again, I can't say thank you enough. I'm a turtle sitting on a fence post. I couldn't do the good job I do without the assistance of a lot of other partners. And before I go, above me, you see a funny looking bird. You've all heard that this is Smokey Bear's 76th birthday. Well, he's got a counterweight. Smokey's done an excellent job in making the public aware of the dangers of wildfire. But there's a new messenger out there, and his name's Burner Bob, and he's a bobwhite quail. He's a cool dude with a hot message, and the message is that prescribed fire helps prevent wildfires, and it creates good habitat for sensitive species. All the best to everyone. Stay safe, come visit, and I welcome any questions.
Oh, thank you, Reese. And what Reese was too modest to share with you is Burner Bob is something that he and some of his closest friends and part of his family came up with. And after all the years of hearing about, well, we needed an ambassador for prescribed fire to go with our ambassador to prevent wildfire, we finally have one, and we're looking forward to seeing Burner Bob showing up outside the Southeast here in the near future. So that's all for our panelists for today. As you can see, there's a broad variety of experience with partners and partnerships for a really diverse set of species. But I don't have any questions showing up yet in the chat, but if you have a question for one of the panelists or for the panel in general about the partnerships they built or what they felt was important in developing those relationships that led to partnerships, please type that in the chat. And while we're waiting on that, if any of I'm going to unmute the panelists, and if there was anything else that one of the panelists wanted to add after hearing from everybody, since we didn't do a full walkthrough of this, we'll turn the panelists loose for a second here while we wait on questions. Let me unmute you fellas. And see if there's anything that anybody would like to add to or reflect on that they heard in the panel while we're waiting for a question.
Steve, I'd maybe just throw out to the rest. I know Russell talks about it well, just in community, but I'm wondering from maybe Jay, Tom, or Reese, did you guys experience the same with neighbors reacting to the fact that you might be dealing with some of these species that were posed to be listed, or did you have any of those kind of same reactions?
Hey, Jim, this is Tom. I would say, no, we didn't have any negative reactions or significant positive reactions at first. A lot of people that own land, they haven't been farmed in many years in New England, especially in Connecticut. So the effort was to reach out and find who those landowners were and encourage them to participate. So there was very little resistance, although the challenge always is understanding, what is the obligation and responsibility in doing that. So it was a little easier, at least in this area. I don't know necessarily in other states in New England if they were met with similar situations or not.
Thanks, Tom. Reese or Jay, anything you guys experienced?
This is Jay. I've experienced a little blowback, but overall it's been positive. I'm a little bit of a maverick, and so I'm used to people questioning what I may be doing, and many times they have a right to question. So, but in order, I think, to get community collaboration going forward, you've really got to have some people who are willing to step up and step out, and maybe not be worried about what others might think about it, but be willing to hopefully do those things which are right. And many of the people who question at first later on become greatest supporters. So overall, it's been a very positive experience for me.
Thanks, Jay.
We have a question for the panel, and this one's not directed at any one particular person. So whatever panelists would like to respond, or if multiple panelists would like to respond. But the question is from Kara, and it's I'll read it out. There's Kara, and she's unmuted. Kara, go ahead, and since you're unmuted, go ahead and read your question and state. I think you're with the Fish and Wildlife Service, but state what your agency is that is pertinent to your question.
Yeah, no, first and foremost, thank you guys for taking the time to share your stories with us. I'm a recovery biologist at headquarters in the Ecological Services Program, and I was just curious if any of you guys have any suggestions on how we can improve our approachability as an agency when it comes to private landowners.
I actually have a thought in regards to that. In my program in Connecticut, we did a number of unique approaches for the habitat improvement, including browse protection and various shrub plantings in different ways. And I think that one of the things that I've seen is that your agencies and as I say, the people, the boots on the ground, they're very busy, and they go from one project to another. And although I keep in touch with the two people from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and the NRCS from time to time, I'd be very curious to know and to see if they would come back and really study the success beyond the number of rabbits, but how effective were the different contracts and programs established here that we did versus other things that they've done. And I just don't know that you have the time or resources to be able to do that.
This is Jay. I think one of the real assets that you have in the agency is the partners program. And those partners biologists, to some degree, it's their job to reach out to landowners. And as they do that, it's been very effective. To a large degree, the reason I'm involved with, not a large degree, exactly the reason I'm involved with the Partners for Conservation group is because the reach out of Carl Fleming, partners biologist that was working in this county at that time. And so those partners biologists, I know they're busy, but I hope that part of their time is scheduled for outreach to meet with landowners and become acquainted with them. And they certainly can improve the relationship of landowners and the agency with whom you're with. Thanks.
Got another, does somebody else have something? I do have another question that's along the same lines, and this is from Richard, I believe, Richard Gooch. I'm going to unmute you or try to.
Hey, Steve. Yeah, it's from Rick Gooch. I'm with the Fish and Wildlife Service in headquarters in Arlington. I worked around the country in various places in various ways over the last few decades. But I was just curious, from some of y'all's stories, it looks like some of this stuff about listing of an endangered species seemed to be a surprise. And I'm wondering if the service can do a better job about avoiding that, that impact emotionally or whatever. Do you guys have any perspective about how we might do a better job or do something differently to get the word out earlier in the process as we go through this decisions about whether to list or not list and what information we might need and all that stuff?
Boy, Richard, I'm not sure I could add much to solving that question. I from here, our perspective, say around grizzly bears or wolves, you all do an incredible job. And part of it is because of how, like a Blackfoot Challenge or a lot of these watershed groups work, it really provides a lot of cover for you all to be sort of integrated into this community conservation piece. And so you become part of our fabric. So there isn't this idea that nobody wants to tell you where a pack of wolves is located. So all this information becomes pretty much a daily thing. So, from our perspective here in Montana, we're getting more and more, as much information as we need about a lot of those critters, and whether it's recovery of bull trout or potential delisting of bears, Fish and Wildlife Service is right there with us. So I think a lot of it's probably based on sort of that whole buildup to how we've created this sort of community basis that you all can come live within.
Any of the other panelists like to respond to getting the word out or strategies?
Well, I think that this is Tom from Connecticut. I think the Department of Environmental Protection or Department of Environmental DEEP does a very good job of getting communications out there. I get a great quarterly brochure that comes out or a magazine, and they're talking about a lot of different species, the work that they're doing. And I think, to be honest, until a landowner or an individual tries to understand and be part of it, or it hits home somehow, it's hard to communicate to people who typically don't have an interest unless it's something that affects them. And it was almost embarrassing for me to tell my story originally because, I had no idea what I was doing. It was about to bulldoze a really important area that affected a species, and I had no idea. And it took a year or two for me to truly understand at being part of the process. So it's going to be a real challenge for you to effectively communicate and get people understanding and involved and committed. That's a real challenge. It takes a part on our end to have a desire or an interest.
This is Jay Tanner. One of the places that I think that it is really important for conservation in our country is the conservation districts. Each state has conservation districts. Supervisors are elected or appointed to represent, and it's through the NRCS, but hopefully the other agencies are taking advantage of these local conservation districts. That's boots on the ground. That's folks, landowners that have stepped up and said they're willing to participate in conservation. And if you have a message that you want to get out, the conservation district is a wonderful place to start.
Yeah, that actually jumped ahead of our next question to one that Karen Sweet from California had answered about the potential role for conservation districts. And thanks, Jay, for that particularly. And hopefully that if you're following chat, you saw that from Karen bringing that up. I do have a question from Janice.
Yes.
Yeah, you are unmuted. Go ahead and ask your question, or if you'd rather me read it, let me know.
Oh, it's fine. I can. I think I remember in the gist of what I wrote. So first, I just want to thank you all for taking time out of your days to share your stories. They're very helpful, and your experiences are valued. I was wondering if given your personal experiences, if there was any particular moment for you that you'd be willing to share that persuaded you to engage in partnerships with the various agencies.
Well, I'll sure go. It's a definitely embarrassing moment for me, but you can live in agriculture your whole life and probably think you know everything, and generally that's what I thought. You came out of college really thinking you knew a lot, and then you found out how much beer you consumed and most of the things you forgot. But you know, my folks just within 3 weeks of me graduating just sort of handed me the keys. And as a young buck, you again probably a whole lot of ego, but we almost lost the ranch because of just really bad ideas and not thinking holistically. And if it wouldn't have been for the partners program, and there's a gentleman, Greg Nidecker, that I think most of you all know, he saved my life. I mean, there is no doubt without the partners program, we would have failed miserably. So that's there. You all that work for the partners, or even for the Fish and Wildlife Service, you're ingrained in my DNA, and you're sure ingrained in our ranch, which has led to conservation easements and a lot of really proactive, really good stuff that's happened. So I was my own worst enemy, and just thought I was really smart, and I turned out you all were the smart ones that saved my life. So thanks for that.
I might add to what Jim has mentioned. In 2007, we had our first Mountain Clover Festival, and that was quite a weekend. It changed our community in a number of ways, and little did I know. But at that time, I still really didn't understand how effective community collaboration could be. And Bill Noonan, Heather Johnson here in Colorado come up with the idea to fly me back to Seeley Lake for a meeting in 2008, the Blackfoot Challenge. And I didn't even know that a collaborative effort like this even existed. And I spent the week there with Jim Stone, Greg Nidecker, a lot of these folks from Fish and Wildlife Service. And that was quite an eye-opener for me to understand that the effectiveness of community collaborative effort, of working with landowners, of cities, of Fish and Wildlife Service folks, state folks, and how effective that partnership could be in dealing with a landscape. And I came back that week so excited about what was going on here in Colorado. And it changed me as a person to realize that this could be done. And I tip my hat to the Blackfoot Challenge and all the good folks back there. They have set the bar high. They've given us a model that we can come home and work at creating something very special in our own backyard. So that was a special week for me to help me understand what collaborative conservation was.
Janice, I would be happy to share with you that there wasn't any one moment for me. In some areas, I'm fairly good at what I do. It has nothing to do with conservation. Sometimes I'm a bit of adult. I can remember after we got one of our first projects done, and we did a lot of shrub planting and cleared some invasive species of plants. About 2 months later, I saw all these weeds growing up, and I called the person from the NRCS, and I said, Bill, I got a whole bunch of weeds down there. You want me to go weed whack them? And I sent him a picture, and he saw it, and he said, no, that's all milkweed. And there was these butterflies. They happened to be monarch butterflies coming from all over, and they were all excited, and I had no idea what they were talking about. And that was the start of me realizing that some of the things we were doing had a bigger impact other than just the New England Cottontail. So for me, it was a series of experiences, a series of new relationships with people, and people that inspired me. And in the end, over the last, I would say 10 years, I began to feel as though I added some value to the greater picture of conservation and the needs throughout this country. And my involvement with Partners for Conservation, following a meeting in Denver, meeting people and agencies and seeing not only the collaboration, but the relationships established. For me, it's been a 10-year series of growth and inspiration. So I can't say there's one moment, but I can say there's been 10 years of a lot of great moments that have helped me understand my role and importance in this process.
Before Before we leave this and move on to the next question, I'll read a statement from chat from another one of our Partners for Conservation board directors, Bill Owen out of Virginia, another longleaf farmer. He suggests always encourage agencies to find a landowner champion. For instance, if a landowner had approached Russell from the beginning, he might have had a very different experience. The fact is that landowners trust other landowners more than agencies, and I think that's probably a fair statement, at least initially, before you have relationships with your partners. I jumping down to one more statement in chat from one of our state partners. In Louisiana, the communication with the Fish and Wildlife Service or other federal agencies is not as advanced as it appears in other states. We oftentimes are surprised with proposed listings or other developments at the federal level. I sit on the Louisiana Landowners Association board and would suggest regular communication with a federal agency regional representative would be good time spent. We have guest speakers monthly, which would likely be an appropriate time to share updated information that might apply to landowners in Louisiana. Well, that was really going back to the question just prior, but a number of states across the country have, whether it's called the Landowners Association, the Forest Landowners Association, some of the state cattlemen associations are very active trying to keep their members up to date on things that are going on regarding land and natural resources. So for those that were asking questions about potential pathways to getting the word out, I would suggest taking a look at chat. And the last question I think that we'll have time for is from Mark. Mark, let me see if I can unmute you, and you can I'll either ask the question for you or you can ask it, whichever you prefer. You should be able to unmute yourself too. I'll get the cat out of the way.
Yeah, I'm a partner biologist in central Wisconsin. And so my landowners aren't working landowners like you guys are. They're just landowners that call me out because they want to improve habitat on their property. And typically they're excited when I tell them that there may be T&E on their property. So my question is that a difference? Your original attitudes were that just because us feds were going to get in your way and stop you from doing what you wanted, or at the time did you just not really care about those T&Es, and how has that evolved? I'm kind of thinking about the difference between my landowners and you guys on how these attitudes are.
What is T&E?
Threatened and endangered.
Oh.
Federally threatened or endangered in this case, Tom.
Yeah.
One of them acronyms.
Sorry, Thomas.
This is Jay. And I think generally speaking, most working land managers recognize the importance of having of that species on the land tell a story about the land. And I'm not aware of really anyone that's trying to get rid of a species or wants to get rid of a species. Unfortunately, there have been those who've been mentioned, as has been mentioned today, that would like to hide from a listing or hide from their habitat, what might be available. And as I've talked with folks, for the most part, I say, listen, federal wildlife management agencies and those kind of things, for the most part, know what species are, where they are at, and what habitat's available. They don't have to come physically onto your property to know that you have those species. And so I think generally speaking, people are more concerned about having a species listed and then having the issues that come with the listing rather than, and so most folks are realizing that it's better to work and avoid the listing than to have all of the things that come along with a listing of a species.
Yeah, Mark, I don't know. I think Jay said that well. You know, it's all about management, right? And I think, you know, people are always pretty amazed that we can get in public meetings and with grizzly bears and wolves and such, and the end of the night conversation is around elk. So, you know, that's been my whole lifetime, 50 years of what are we going to do with these elk? So having a few of those T&E species are helping control numbers of elk, but a little different than Jay. We've got a couple of critters that at times want to eat me and our lifestyle. So it adds some complexity to how people do view that. And there's all that history of, well, we eliminated them once, why don't we just do it again? But it is that balance. It is that holistic approach. And it is that proper pacing. You've got to let those people come along. And there's so many tools in the toolbox to help mitigate grizzly bear cattle issues or wolf cattle issues. So those have been very helpful. But the cool part is, you know, after 20 some years of it, we're starting to find landowners that go, man, not only is it viewable, right? People don't get to see grizzly bears every day, and you can come into the valley and see a grizzly bear virtually every day. And so it's adding some economic thoughts to that, but it's people are pretty proud to say that, you know, there's a bear named Bob, you know, out there that Fish and Wildlife or the state collared. So I think it is that sort of long-term relationship that it takes time to do that. But in a landscape like ours, there's still lots of people that just go, you know, if you want to stop bear problems, just get rid of the bear. And so, you know, we're still a little bit redneck out here yet, but it's coming.
All right.
The knuckleheads in Connecticut feed the bears.
I know that Jim didn't share it this time around, but I know something that I've heard him say, and a number of the landowners in his landscape talk about, that all the species that were in the Blackfoot when Lewis and Clark came through way back when are still there, and that's something I think a whole lot of people, landowners and partners alike in that landscape, have a lot of pride in. So I think you know, it's every situation is different, but hopefully as we've heard from the landowners today, you've seen that there's a diversity of perspectives on partnership, but I think that communication, trust, credibility, and just taking the time to work on all those has been common denominator in all of these stories, and important to all the partnership work that's been talked about today. I want to thank our panelists for, it's just like if you're a biologist, it's your field season. If you're a landowner, this is an extremely busy time of year for most of these gentlemen. So really thank them for their time taken out in the middle of their busy day to come share with you. There will be a link sent out to everybody that registered late tonight or tomorrow morning with a video recording of this Zoom event that feel free to share for those that missed it, that might get something out of it. And we will be having another one of these, and I'll make sure everybody that was on the list for this one gets a notification of our next one on a different topic in September. So thank you all for your time. I hope this was a good use of time, and we will hopefully see you at a Zoom event or a real event sometime soon. Thank you very much.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, Heather.
everyone.